I have seen people spend thousands of dollars without thinking twice. Then I watched a woman give away her last dollar. The memory stayed with me long after that afternoon ended. At the time I did not know her name. I did not know where she lived. I did not know why she looked so exhausted. All I knew was that something about her refused to leave my mind. It happened on a cold Thursday in Chicago. The kind of afternoon when gray clouds hung low over the city and people hurried past each other without making eye contact. I was sitting inside my car across the street from a small convenience store while waiting for a meeting to begin. My schedule was packed. My phone would not stop vibrating. Yet none of that mattered the moment I noticed her. She stepped out of the store carrying a worn canvas bag. She looked young. Maybe 27. Blonde hair pulled back. Simple blue uniform. Tired eyes. The kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. She paused near the entrance and opened her wallet. From where I sat, I could see her counting bills carefully. 1, 2, 3. Not much. Then she frowned. A little boy stood near a food cart half a block away. He could not have been older than 10. His jacket looked too thin for the weather. He stared at a sandwich displayed behind the glass case. The vendor spoke to him. The boy lowered his head and stepped back. Even from a distance, the disappointment was obvious. Most people never would have noticed. She did. The young woman looked down at her wallet again, then back at the boy. She hesitated. Not because she did not want to help. Because she was deciding whether she could afford to. For a few seconds she stood completely still. Then she made her choice. She walked directly toward the food cart. She handed the vendor the last bill from her wallet. The vendor gave the sandwich to the boy. His face lit up instantly. The woman smiled. The boy thanked her several times. She simply nodded and walked away. No speech. No attention. No expectation of gratitude. Just a quiet act of kindness before disappearing into the crowd. I should have forgotten about it. People help strangers every day. Yet something felt different. Maybe it was the way she counted her money first. Maybe it was the fact that she clearly needed that dollar herself. Whatever the reason, I found myself watching her cross the street and disappear around the corner. The meeting I had been waiting for suddenly felt unimportant. Later that evening I saw her again.
Pure coincidenze.
I stopped at a small coffee shop near downtown after finishing work. The same woman stood behind the counter taking orders. Her uniform was different now. Another job. She greeted customers with a warm smile despite looking exhausted. A few minutes later I watched her glance at her phone. The smile vanished briefly. Concern appeared across her face. She quickly hid it and returned to work. Most people would never have noticed the change. I did. Something told me life was not being kind to her. Around midnight, I drove past a hospital on my way home. The parking lot lights reflected across the wet pavement. As I approached the entrance, I saw a familiar figure sitting alone on a bench. The same woman. She was holding a stack of medical papers. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of something far heavier than exhaustion. She stared at the documents for a long time before finally standing and walking inside. That was the moment curiosity became something else. Because people do not work 2 jobs, give away their last dollar, and spend their nights at hospitals unless they are carrying a burden most of the world cannot see. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly wanted to know her story. The next morning, I told myself I would forget about her. Chicago was filled with people carrying invisible burdens. I had businesses to run, meetings to attend, problems worth millions of dollars waiting for my attention. Yet sometime around noon, I found myself driving past the same hospital again. The parking lot was crowded. Ambulances came and went. Families moved through the entrance carrying flowers, coffee, and hope. Then I saw her. Hannah Brooks. I still did not know her name, but I watched her step out of the building holding a paper bag from the pharmacy. Her shoulders looked tense. Her eyes carried the same exhaustion I had noticed the night before. She checked her phone, sighed quietly, and headed toward a bus stop instead of a car. That detail stayed with me. Most people would not think twice about it. I did. For reasons I could not explain, I followed from a distance. The bus carried her across the city toward a modest neighborhood on the west side. She stepped off near a small apartment complex and disappeared inside. 30 minutes later, She emerged wearing the same blue uniform from the convenience store. Another shift. Another long day. The realization bothered me more than it should have. That evening I stopped by the store again. Not intentionally, I told myself. Just coincidence. Hannah stood behind the register greeting customers with the same warm smile. An elderly man entered carrying a basket filled with groceries. When his card failed, embarrassment spread across his face. Before he could begin removing items, Hannah quietly paid the difference herself. The amount was not large. Maybe $8. Yet her expression revealed that even $8 mattered. The old man thanked her repeatedly. She simply smiled and wished him a good evening. I watched from the back of the store. Most people never would have noticed. Hannah seemed to believe kindness was something you did when nobody was watching. Later, during a slow moment, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Medical bills. I could see enough to understand the situation immediately. The numbers were substantial. Much larger than anything someone working multiple hourly jobs should have been carrying. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she closed it quickly and returned to helping customers. No complaints. No self-pity. Just quiet determination. Around midnight, her shift finally ended. Instead of going home, she walked 3 blocks through cold wind toward a 24-hour diner. My curiosity should have ended there. It did not. Through the diner window, I watched her put on a different uniform and begin another shift. Coffee pots. Menus. Late-night customers. The woman had been working almost non-stop. Hours passed. At 2 in the morning, she sat alone for a brief break. She opened her wallet. Empty. Not. Nearly empty. Completely empty. She stared at it for several seconds before placing it back into her apron. Then she drank water instead of ordering food and returned to work. Something tightened in my chest. The image refused to leave me. A woman who had given away her last dollar. A woman carrying medical debt she could barely afford. A woman working herself to exhaustion while continuing to help strangers. By the time I left the diner, one thought kept repeating itself. People like Hannah Brooks should not exist. And yet somehow she did. Over the next several days, I stopped pretending my interest was accidental. Curiosity had become a habit. Every morning, I found reasons to drive past the hospital. Every evening, I somehow ended up near the convenience store or the diner. The strange part was not that I kept seeing Hannah Brooks. The strange part was that every time I saw her, she gave me another reason to stay. One rainy afternoon, I watched her leave the hospital carrying a paper bag and a folder filled with documents. She stopped beside a vending machine in the lobby. A young woman nearby was crying quietly while speaking on the phone. Most people walked past without looking. Hannah did not. She sat beside the stranger and listened. Just listened. 10 minutes later, the woman was smiling through tears. Hannah handed her a tissue, wished her luck, and continued on her way. No audience. No reward. Just kindness. 2 days later, I saw her at the diner during a busy lunch rush. An elderly customer accidentally dropped a cup of coffee across the table. Before anyone else reacted, Hannah rushed over with towels and a reassuring smile. The customer looked embarrassed. Hannah somehow turned the entire situation into a joke that made him laugh. The tension disappeared instantly. Watching her felt like watching someone perform a skill nobody else had mastered. She made people feel less alone. That evening, I finally learned why she spent so much time at the hospital. One of my contacts happened to know a senior administrator at St. Mary's Medical Center. I asked a simple question. The answer stayed with me for the rest of the night. Hannah's father had been receiving treatment for nearly a year. Heart complications. Multiple procedures. Mounting medical debt. Insurance covered some expenses. Not enough. Suddenly every piece of the puzzle made sense. The second job. The empty wallet. The exhaustion. The constant trips to the hospital. Hannah was not working herself to death because she wanted a better life. She was trying to save someone she loved. The realization should have satisfied my curiosity. Instead, it made everything worse. Because now I understood exactly how much pressure she carried. A week later, I arrived at the hospital just before sunset. Through a window overlooking the parking lot, I saw Hannah sitting beside her father. He looked older than his years but smiled every time she spoke. She was telling him a story about something that happened at work. Both of them laughed. For a few minutes the bills, the schedules, and the stress seemed to disappear. Then her father asked a question. I could not hear the words. I only saw Hannah's reaction. She smiled and nodded confidently. Yet the moment he looked away, the smile faded. Concern returned immediately. She was protecting him from the truth, carrying the fear so he would not have to. That image followed me everywhere. Later that night, after her shift ended at the diner, Hannah stepped outside into cold air and checked her bank account on her phone. Even from across the street, I could see the disappointment on her face. She closed her eyes briefly before slipping the phone back into her pocket. Then she squared her shoulders and started walking toward the bus stop. No complaints. No anger. Just determination. I sat inside my car watching her disappear into the darkness. For years, I had met people who wanted something from me. Money. Influence. Opportunity. Hannah was different. She never asked anyone for anything. And somehow, that made me want to help her more than anyone I had ever known. The more I learned about Hannah Brooks, the less sense the world seemed to make. For years, I had built my life around a simple assumption. People acted in their own interests. Maybe not all the time. Maybe not openly. But eventually, everyone protected themselves first. Hannah appeared determined to prove me wrong. One Monday morning, I arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center earlier than usual. Through the lobby windows, I spotted Hannah speaking with a billing representative. Even from across the room, I could tell the conversation was not easy. The representative handed her several forms. Hannah read them carefully. Then she asked a few questions. Her expression remained polite, but the tension in her shoulders said everything. More expenses. More decisions. More pressure. When the meeting ended, she thanked the woman and walked away carrying a thicker stack of paperwork than before. Most people would have complained. Hannah headed directly to her father's room instead. Through the partially open door, I watched her smile before entering. The smile looked genuine. That was the remarkable part. She never carried her fear into that room. Whatever burden she felt belonged to her alone. Later that afternoon, she left the hospital and rushed to the diner. The lunch crowd was overwhelming. Every table seemed occupied. Orders piled up. Customers grew impatient. Yet somehow Hannah moved through the chaos with steady confidence. Then something happened that caught my attention. A young mother entered with 2 children and quietly counted cash before ordering. Hannah noticed immediately. A few minutes later, one of the children's meals arrived with an extra dessert. The mother tried to explain that she had not ordered it. Hannah smiled and told her the kitchen had made a mistake. The grateful look on the woman's face suggested she understood exactly what had happened. Another small act of kindness. Another expense Hannah could not afford. That evening, I received more information from my contacts. The medical debt was worse than I originally believed. Much worse. Hannah had exhausted her savings months earlier. Several bills were approaching their deadlines. The apartment rent had increased. Her father's next treatment phase would require additional payments. The numbers painted a bleak picture. For the first time, I understood that determination alone might not be enough. No matter how hard she worked, the math refused to cooperate. 2 days later, I witnessed something that finally changed everything. Near midnight, Hannah finished her diner shift and stopped at a grocery store before heading home. She moved slowly through the aisles, comparing prices on basic items. Bread, soup, pasta. Nothing unnecessary. At the checkout counter, she removed several items after seeing the total. Then she paid and left. 20 minutes later, she arrived at her apartment building carrying a single grocery bag. As she approached the entrance, she noticed an elderly neighbor struggling with multiple packages. Without hesitation, Hannah carried the bags upstairs for her. The task took nearly 15 minutes. When she finally returned to her own apartment, she looked completely exhausted. Yet she still smiled after the woman thanked her. Sitting inside my car across the street, I stared at the building long after the lights inside her apartment turned off. Something had shifted. Curiosity was gone. Admiration had taken its place. Hannah Brooks kept choosing kindness even when life gave her every reason not to. And for the first time since I noticed her standing beside that food cart, I stopped asking whether I should get involved. The real question had become how long I could stand by and do nothing. The following week proved something I had already begun to suspect. Life was not finished testing Hannah Brooks. Every time she climbed one hill, another appeared waiting for her. On Tuesday morning, she left St. Mary's Medical Center carrying less paperwork than usual. For a brief moment, I thought perhaps things were improving. Then I watched her stop on the sidewalk and read a letter that had arrived in the mail. Her expression changed immediately. The small amount of hope she carried seemed to disappear. Later that day I learned why. Her apartment building had been sold to a new management company. Rent would increase beginning the following month. Not by a few dollars. By enough to create a serious problem. Hannah already worked 2 jobs. She already stretched every paycheck beyond reason. There was no extra money hiding anywhere. That evening, she sat alone in a corner booth during her break at the diner. A notebook rested open in front of her. Numbers filled every page. Rent, utilities, medical bills, groceries, transportation. She erased figures repeatedly, searching for a solution that did not exist. Eventually she lowered her pencil and stared out the window. For the first time since I noticed her, she looked defeated. Not broken. Just tired in a way that reached deeper than physical exhaustion. The next afternoon brought another setback. Her father's doctor recommended an additional treatment plan. The news was encouraging from a medical perspective. The treatment offered real promise. Unfortunately, it also came with additional costs. Hannah listened carefully while taking notes. She asked practical questions. Payment schedules. Insurance coverage. Deadlines. When the meeting ended, she thanked the doctor and walked toward the parking lot. Only after she believed nobody was watching did she stop and close her eyes. The weight of everything seemed almost visible. Yet an hour later she was back at work smiling at strangers. That night rain covered the city. Wind pushed against storefront windows. Most people hurried indoors. Hannah finished her shift at the convenience store shortly before midnight. As she walked toward the bus stop, she noticed a homeless veteran sitting beneath an awning. His coat was soaked from the weather. A cardboard sign rested beside him. She stopped, reached into her bag, pulled out the sandwich she had planned to eat for dinner. Then she handed it to him. The man looked stunned. Hannah smiled and continued walking. I sat across the street watching the entire exchange. She had almost nothing left. Somehow she still found something to give away. The following morning, I received updated information regarding her financial situation. The numbers were worse than before. Much worse. If nothing changed, Hannah would soon face impossible choices. Keep paying for treatment or keep her apartment. Buy groceries or cover transportation. Rest or work another shift. Nobody should have been forced to live that way. Especially not someone who spent every day helping other people carry their burdens. That evening I watched her leave the hospital after visiting her father. The city lights reflected across the wet pavement. Her shoulders seemed smaller somehow. More fragile. Yet she continued moving forward one step at a time. Determined. Quiet. Unwilling to surrender. As she disappeared into the crowd, I finally accepted a truth I had been avoiding. Hannah Brooks was approaching a cliff she could not see. And if I waited much longer, kindness alone would not be enough to save her from the fall. The decision came quietly.
No dramatic moment.
No grand revelation. Just a realization that arrived after weeks of watching Hannah Brooks fight battles she should never have faced alone. By then, doing nothing felt harder than getting involved. The challenge was not helping her. The challenge was helping her without damaging the one thing she valued most. Her dignity. The first opportunity appeared through St. Mary's Medical Center. One of the hospital foundations regularly reviewed financial assistance cases for long-term patients. Normally, the waiting list stretched for months. I made a few phone calls. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dishonest. I simply ensured that Hannah's father's application received the attention it deserved. 2 weeks later, the foundation approved a substantial assistance package. Not enough to solve everything. Enough to create breathing room. I happened to be in the hospital lobby the day Hannah received the news. She stood reading the letter several times as if afraid she misunderstood it. Then she called her father immediately. A smile slowly appeared across her face. Not a large smile, just a small one. But after everything I had seen, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The second opportunity arrived unexpectedly. One of my hospitality companies partnered with several local restaurants, including the diner where Hannah worked. During a routine staffing review, her name appeared repeatedly. Reliable, professional, excellent with customers, strong leadership potential. None of those observations surprised me. What surprised me was that nobody had promoted her. That changed. A few days later, Hannah was offered a supervisory position. Better pay, better hours, more stability. When her manager shared the news, she looked completely stunned. "Are you serious?" she asked. The manager laughed. "You earned this months ago." Hannah blinked rapidly before thanking him. For the first time in weeks, hope appeared stronger than worry. Yet the moment that stayed with me happened several days later. I stopped by the convenience store late at night. Hannah stood behind the register as usual. A teenage customer approached carrying cold medicine and basic groceries. His card was declined. Embarrassment flooded his face immediately. Before I could react, Hannah quietly covered the difference herself. Again. Even now. Even after everything. The teenager thanked her repeatedly. Hannah smiled and wished him well. I stood in the aisle pretending to browse while shaking my head. The woman simply would not stop helping people. It was who she was. Over the following month, small improvements continued appearing in her life. Her father's treatment responded positively. The foundation assistance reduced immediate pressure. The promotion increased her income. For the first time since I met her, she occasionally left work before midnight. Sometimes she even slept more than a few hours. The changes were subtle, but they mattered. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. I entered the diner shortly before closing. Hannah was sitting alone during her break. No bills covered the table. No calculator. No notebook filled with impossible numbers. Just a cup of coffee and a moment of peace. As I walked past, she looked up and smiled. A real smile. Relaxed. Genuine. "You seem to come here often," she said. I laughed softly. I was about to say the same thing. For several minutes we talked. Nothing important. Weather. Work. The city. Yet somehow the conversation felt easier than many I had spent years having. When her break ended, she stood and returned to work. I remained in the booth watching her disappear into the kitchen. Something had changed. Helping Hannah had begun as admiration, then concern, then responsibility. Now, for the first time, I wondered whether it had become something far more dangerous. Because the truth was simple. Somewhere along the way, Hannah Brooks had stopped being a stranger. The truth arrived on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. That was the strange thing about life. The moments that change everything rarely announce themselves. Hannah had just finished visiting her father at St. Mary's Medical Center when a foundation coordinator stopped her in the hallway. I happened to be walking through the lobby at the same time. Neither of us expected what came next. The coordinator smiled warmly and asked whether she was enjoying the financial assistance program. Hannah thanked her and said it had changed her family's situation completely. Then the woman mentioned my name. Only once. A simple sentence. A passing reference. But it was enough. I saw confusion appear on Hannah's face immediately. The coordinator realized her mistake too late. Hannah asked a question. Then another. Within seconds, pieces that had been scattered across months began fitting together. The assistance package. The promotion. The opportunities. The timing. The coordinator quickly excused herself, but the damage was done. Hannah stood motionless in the hallway staring at nothing. When she finally turned, her eyes found me standing across the lobby. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked directly toward me. Not angry. Not yet. Just determined to hear the truth. We ended up in a quiet corner near the hospital garden. The autumn air felt cooler than usual. Hannah folded her arms and looked at me carefully. "How much of this was you?" she asked. There was no point pretending. "More than you probably realize," I answered. Silence followed. Long enough for distant traffic to become noticeable. Long enough for disappointment to settle across her face. "Why?" she finally asked. That question was harder. Not because I lacked an answer, because I had too many. I could have mentioned the medical bills, the impossible schedule, the nights she spent worrying while protecting everyone around her. Instead, I told her the truth, because I watched someone keep helping people, even when life was giving her every reason to stop. Hannah looked away. You should have asked. You would have said no. She laughed softly, not from amusement, from frustration. You do not know that. Ido. More silence. Leaves drifted across the garden path behind us. A nurse pushed a wheelchair toward the entrance. Life continued around us while something important shifted between us. Do you know what this feels like? Hannah asked. It feels like everyone decided I could not solve my own problems. The words landed harder than I expected, because part of me understood exactly what she meant. Hannah had spent months fighting to hold her world together. Discovering that someone had quietly altered the outcome without her knowledge challenged her sense of independence. I never thought you were weak, I said quietly. Then why help me? Her eyes met mine again. Tired. Hurt. Honest. The answer arrived before I could stop it. Because watching you struggle was becoming harder than helping. Hannah blinked. Something changed in her expression. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the anger softened slightly. She studied me for several seconds. You really have been watching all this time, have you not? I nodded. Longer than I should have. For the first time that afternoon, a faint smile appeared. Small. Uncertain. Gone almost immediately. I need time, she said. I know. She turned toward the hospital entrance. After a few steps, she stopped and glanced back. For what it is worth, my father is doing better. I smiled. I know. Hannah shook her head as if she still could not decide whether to be grateful or annoyed. Then she disappeared through the doors. I remained alone in the garden watching autumn leaves scatter across the pavement. The secret was gone. The truth was finally between us. And for the first time since I met Hannah Brooks, I had absolutely no idea what would happen next. 3 days passed before I heard from Hannah again. 3 long days filled with meetings, phone calls, and responsibilities that normally occupied my attention without effort. This time was different. No matter what I was doing, part of my mind remained fixed on a hospital garden and the look in her eyes when she learned the truth. I respected her need for space. That did not make waiting any easier. Then late Friday afternoon my phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Hello. A brief pause followed. It is Hannah. Her voice sounded calmer than before. Not completely at ease. Just calmer. Would you like to meet for coffee? She asked. An hour later we sat across from each other in a small cafe overlooking the Chicago River. The autumn sun reflected across the water outside. People walked along the riverwalk carrying shopping bags and warm drinks. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Hannah smiled slightly. I spent 3 days trying to decide whether I was angry or grateful. I laughed softly. And what was the verdict? She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. A little of both. That answer felt honest enough to trust. The conversation moved slowly at first. Hannah asked questions I knew were coming. How long had I known about her situation? How much help had I arranged? Why had I become involved at all? This time I answered everything. No secrets. No half-truths. When I finished, she stared out the window for a while. Do you know what bothers me most? She asked. The fact that I never noticed. I shook my head. You were too busy carrying everyone else. Her eyes met mine. Something softened there. Not because of what I said. Because she knew it was true. For years, Hannah had focused entirely on surviving. Looking after her father. Paying bills. Working impossible hours. Helping strangers whenever she could. She never stopped long enough to imagine someone might be paying attention to her. My father likes you, she said unexpectedly. That is good news. He says people reveal themselves through small choices. I smiled. Your father sounds wise. Hannah laughed quietly. He said the same thing about you. The afternoon passed faster than either of us expected. For the first time we were not talking about debts or hospitals or problems. We talked about books, favorite places in the city, childhood memories, dreams that had been postponed. Hannah admitted she once wanted to create a community reading center for children who lacked access to books and educational programs. The moment she described it, her entire face changed. The exhaustion disappeared. Hope replaced it. I found myself listening more carefully than I had listened to anyone in years. When the cafe began preparing to close, neither of us seemed eager to leave. We walked along the river afterward. The city lights slowly appeared as evening settled across Chicago. At one point, Hannah stopped beside the railing overlooking the water. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course." She looked toward the skyline. "For a long time I thought kindness was just something you gave away." Her voice remained quiet. "Now I think maybe it comes back too. Just not always from the place you expect." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The river reflected hundreds of lights between us and the city. Finally Hannah smiled. A genuine smile. Warm. Unguarded. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the money. Not for the assistance. For seeing her when the rest of the world was looking somewhere else." And standing beside her beneath the glow of the city lights, I realized something important. The woman who had changed countless lives through small acts of kindness was finally beginning to believe she deserved some kindness of her own. 3 years later, I stood outside a building that should not have existed. At least not according to the numbers. Not according to the odds. Yet there it was, rising proudly beneath a bright autumn sky on the west side of Chicago. Children filled the sidewalks. Parents gathered near the entrance. Laughter drifted through open windows. Above the front doors hung a simple sign. Carter Community Reading Center. Hannah's dream had become real. I watched from across the street for a moment before crossing toward the entrance. Some habits never disappear completely. Part of me still preferred observing her before she noticed I was there. Through the glass doors I could see her moving between bookshelves, greeting families and helping children choose stories. She looked different now. Not because life had become perfect. Because she no longer carried the same weight. The exhaustion that once lived behind her eyes had been replaced by confidence, purpose, peace. When she finally spotted me, her face brightened immediately. That smile still had the same effect on me after all this time. "You are late," she said when I walked inside. "By 3 minutes. I knew you would be counting." She laughed and shook her head. Nearby, a group of children sat listening to a volunteer read aloud from a book. Across the room, parents relaxed in comfortable chairs while their children explored shelves filled with stories. Everything reflected Hannah's vision. Warm lighting, open spaces, opportunity, hope. The center had already helped hundreds of families during its first year alone. Watching it succeed felt more satisfying than any business deal I had ever completed. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "There he is." Hannah's father approached with a smile. Healthy, strong, walking without assistance. Years earlier, I had watched Hannah fight desperately for his treatment. Seeing him now felt like witnessing a miracle built one day at a time. We spent the afternoon together. Families came and went. Children filled the rooms with energy. Volunteers organized events. The center felt alive in a way that numbers on financial reports never could. As evening approached, the crowd slowly disappeared. The final visitors left. The lights softened. Silence settled over the building. Hannah and I stood near a large window overlooking the street. The same city stretched beyond the glass. The same skyline. The same endless movement. Yet everything felt different. "Do you ever think about that day?" Hannah asked quietly. "Which one?" She smiled. "You know exactly which one." Of course I did. The cold afternoon. The food cart. The little boy. The final dollar. The moment everything began. "Sometimes," I admitted. Hannah looked out toward the fading sunset. "I almost kept walking that day." "But you did not." "No," she laughed softly. Funny how one small decision can change so much. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the city lights appear one by one. Then Hannah reached for my hand. A simple gesture. Quiet. Certain. Real. I thought about all the things that had happened since that afternoon. The struggles. The setbacks. The hope. The healing. Most people spend their lives searching for proof that kindness matters. Hannah had become that proof. She changed her father's future. She changed the lives of countless children. And without ever intending to, she changed mine too. Looking at the reading center filled with books, laughter, and possibility, I finally understood something that had taken years to learn. Some people spend their last dollar and lose it forever. Hannah Brooks gave hers away. And somehow, that single dollar came back as an entirely different life.